So, on my video for the Season 2 finale, I received this comment from Beautiful Redesign, which essentially said, "This season has shown us multiple examples of love transcending severance, so why does Mark choose to stay with Helly instead of leaving with Gemma?" And I did reply to this comment, but since then, I've had many more thoughts. Not just about that choice, but about what the story of Severance is really exploring and where it might be going next. Because here's the thing, throughout this season, we have seen multiple examples that love does seem to pass through the severance barrier. So then we have to ask, why did Mark choose Helly? Let's start by looking at what the show's creators have said in regards to whether love does transcend severance. Dan Erickson said in an interview with Deadline on the 17th of January, which was the day episode 1 came out, that there is an ambiguity to it as to what exactly transcends the severance barrier. There are certain things that are intrinsic, where they have made their way into the part of your mind that is where it can transcend the barrier. But then you continue to interrogate that, and you're like, well, what about strong feelings, like love? Would you recognize your spouse if you saw them on the other side? Or even if you didn't consciously recognize them? Would there be part of you that does? And if you're crying in your car before you come to work, physiologically, what does that do to your body? Do you still feel that way when you come down the elevator? It gets to questions of nature versus nurture, and mind versus body, and what is intrinsic to who we are, and what is based on the experiences that we've had. Those are the questions that we're going to be continuing to ask throughout the entire series. So the idea of exploring what can pass through the severance barrier and what can't is a central theme of the entire show. And because of that, they knew exactly where Season 2 was going. According to Ben Stiller, in a recent Deadline interview from the 21st of March, he and the team behind the show knew how Season 2 would end down to the very last scene from the beginning. He said, "We felt like, okay, this is going to be leading to this decision of Mark between Helly and Gemma." With the article going on to say, "The whole complication of Mark's choice throws the question of what transcends the severance barrier, specifically when it comes to love." With Dan Erickson adding, "I think there's no easy answer to that question in terms of what it transcends, and it may be different for different people. In the case of Irving and Bert, we see that there is something that transcends, whether it's some sort of instinctual memory of the love they had, or if it's just that they're both intrinsically the same people as their innies, and that they would tend to be drawn to each other. There, we see that it does seem to cross over. With Mark and Gemma, we see the inverse of that, which is, as he's looking at her, part of it would be easier if he did feel love for this woman, and if he could fulfill his mission that he's sort of had since the beginning of the season, which is to save her. It's a painful realization for him in that moment, that he just doesn't feel that for her. He just doesn't, and the only person that he feels that for is standing behind him, and so that's ultimately the direction that he goes. And it's a moment where it's a choice between two loves, but it's also a choice between two identities and two wives. And it's him saying, my love and thus my existence is valid and is as important as that of my Outie. So Mark's choice in the finale highlights the emotional and philosophical centre that's at the core of the show. And that brings us to the contradiction at hand. If love can transcend severance, why doesn't it for Innie, Mark and Gemma? And to help us answer that, let's examine what has actually been shown to us, starting with Innie Mark. Innie Mark is currently at his adolescent stage, still emotionally young. He's only existed for about 2 years now, so he hasn't had a chance to even live a full life yet. And when he starts to form feelings, real, genuine emotional feelings, they go to the only person who's ever made him feel something in the here and now, which is Helly. And these emotional feelings are probably super intense since he's basically in the adolescent teenage phase of his life, and it's the first time he's ever felt something like this. So all of these emotions probably feel very overwhelming and overpowering for him. And maybe this isn't just about the intensity of his emotions. Maybe it also involves identity divergence. Because Innie Mark isn't just a part of Outie Mark. He's an entirely new person with different emotional feelings, making his own choices. And Helly isn't a stand-in for Gemma, a woman he's never met or loved. Helly is his first love. And as Dan Erickson said about Innie Mark not following Gemma, It would be easier if he felt love for her, but he just doesn't. And that's because Innie Mark doesn't know or love Gemma. He's only met Miss Casey, a version of Gemma that's entirely different to a regular severed Innie. Miss Casey doesn't behave like a regular typical Innie we've seen on the severed floor. She's extremely calm, docile, and compliant, and even says herself that she knows she's different, likely because she doesn't have the same emotional responses as the other Innies. And that's probably because she wasn't a regular severed Innie. I think Ms. Casey is one of Gemma's 25 Innies, the experimental Innie iteration versions that have been created through the refinement process in MDR. So this is what I think the sequence of events looks like. Insert severance chip. Chip collects brain data in the form of memories and emotional reactions to memories, and presumably, Lumen makes a copy of this data. This copy of the brain data is what the files are in MDR. The numbers are refined by the refiner by identifying the emotions, the tempers, within the brain data and putting them into buckets. Side note, maybe I'll explore this more in detail in another video, but for now, we're just giving a brief idea of what's happening. So then the file is completed, which means a part of the brain data copy has now been rewritten to have, hopefully, a perfectly tamed emotional response Innie. And Lumen can now test out this refined brain data copy by uploading it into Gemma's actual chip when she passes through a certain severance barrier. So when she steps into a new room and a new Innie is turned on. Essentially, I think they're trying to engineer an Innie version of someone who responds exactly how Lumen wants, which is a perfectly tempers tamed Innie. And Miss Casey mostly fits that description, but not perfectly. She still says things that imply emotional bleed through. In season 1, she tells Irving that Bert is waiting for him in the boardroom, which is something she didn't have to say, and presumably she did it because she somewhat cares about their friendship connection. And then we see how she doesn't watch over Helly properly. She doesn't do it in the way that Cobel expected of her, since Mark and Helly end up walking in the halls alone. And I think this is the reason she seemingly got fired, because these are instances that prove that she's not fully refined, since her actions and words are still being informed by some sort of emotional undercurrents, rather than just being a perfectly compliant, loyal Lumen worker. And we also see more of this emotional bleed through when she then tells Mark that the 8 hours she spent in MDR watching Helly were the happiest time of her existence. And it's after this when Cobel then says to Milchick, take her back down to the testing floor, which I think is showing how she's being fired for not being fully refined, like it's due to Ms. Casey not following Cobel's orders of watching over Helly properly, which is what gets her fired. And this scene also showed how Cobel isn't satisfied with her little side project between Ms. Casey and Mark, and it seemingly not having the desired results. And what was Cobel's side project even about, you may be asking? Well, I think this video's entire topic is exactly what Cobel was testing. Specifically, can love, as an emotion, a feeling, a memory, bleed through into Mark's Outie life? So here's how I think the timeline sequence of events went. Gemma was the original target for whatever reasons Lumen had. Mark was the secondary target, where they almost certainly prey on vulnerable people to get severed. So since they know he'll be grieving his wife, and because they own the entire town, they could have easily implanted the idea of getting severed as a way to A, have a job, and B, heal from the trauma, as we see Milchick say to Mark in season 2 episode 2 about his Innie falling in love with someone and trying to convince him to stay working at Lumen because those happy feelings his Innie has will eventually make their way to you out here. So then Mark joins Lumen as a refiner, and this is the first time Lumen has ever had someone working in MDR who had an Outie life connection to someone on the testing floor. And this is why as detailed on the show's wiki, when Mark S. was first hired on the Severed floor, his first assignment was to refine the Allentown file. He did an unusually outstanding job refining the file much faster than most new employees would be able to. And on the wiki page, we also have Dylan's explanation, which says how in Season 1, Episode 2, as Irving begins to doze off and hallucinate, Dylan tells Helly about Mark's freshman fluke, which led Lumen to overhaul how the MDR team operates. The audio is garbled, reversed, and some words are completely unintelligible, but the following transcript is a close approximation. And it says, "But why don't we always finish the files? Because they only keep so long. You know, we finish on average 1 in 5 files before they expire, which is better than it used to be before Mark's freshman fluke. What's a freshman fluke? They only last so long. Oh my god, why? Don't go getting all impressed, but I guess he knocked out a full file. Still have no idea how he did it. 4 out of 7 of us. Still no clue how, but they reverse engineered a process based on whatever he did. Now the average file takes 6 weeks. Mark still holds the record. That's why he got that gaudy human head." And the wiki page also includes this interview answer Dan Erickson gave, where he said, "There's something special about Mark that causes her, Ms. Cobel, to feel like she has to keep special tabs on him. There's a whole backstory there that is just kind of alluded to. But it's basically the idea that Mark came in and he was inexplicably better at refining the files than others were, at least for the first file that he worked on, which was called Allentown. And so Mark came in and was able to really quickly refine this file, and then they were able to reverse engineer a better procedure from what he did. We don't get into it super far, but the idea is that he is kind of Cobel's golden boy in that way, because he came in and sort of had this great success right when he was first there. So now we know that because this was the first time a refiner was assigned to someone they had a real emotional connection to, that's why he completed the file so fast." And Dan Erickson also added this context in a recent interview with the Washington Post from the 21st of March, where he said, "He's finding her tempers, and he's able to recognize them because, on a deep level, that transcends severance, he knows her, he understands her, and he can see the pieces of her soul and identify them. He's able to use them to build these new versions of her, and the reason it works is because he loves her so much." That final line is so important because it means that the connection doesn't have to be rooted in memory. It can emerge from something deeper, something instinctive, subconscious, maybe even soul-level type emotional connections. And that's why Cobel started to show an interest in Mark. I think she wondered if some sort of emotional connective traces of Gemma still lived inside him, across the severance barrier. And now that we know she invented the chip and carries all of her own unresolved trauma from like losing her mother and being raised in the cult of Keir Egan and Lumen and having family members like her crazy cult following aunt, her obsession with Mark takes on a new dimension. It's not just about him, it's about her. She sees him as a test case, but maybe also a mirror. Mark's grief, his lingering connection to his wife even after severance, might represent to Cobel the possibility that something human, something real, emotional, can survive even the most brutal partitioning of the self. So in that sense, her interest in Mark may be a kind of projection. He becomes a surrogate through which she explores her own unanswered questions. Did her own love for her mother survive what was done to her, what she went through? Is there something in the human soul that can't be cut apart? Maybe for Cobel, proving that love can't be severed would validate her own pain, or perhaps give her the hope that what she lost isn't completely gone, maybe as some form of closure. Because there's also this idea that Cobel herself, although not having a severance chip, has still gone through a different kind of severance. Dan Erickson mentioned in a video interview with Austin Film Festival on the 1st of June 2024 that some people thought she was severed in Season 1, but she's not. And then said, "With her, we wanted to look at sort of the ways that people can sever without severance. Because I think there is a sense that as Ms. Selvig, she is living a life that she can't as Cobel. So it's like, what are the ways that we, even as people who are not severed, sort of segment their life and live out different versions of themselves in different scenarios?" So since we know Cobel was raised in the Keir Egan, Lumen, deeply religious, hyper-controlled cult-type environment, she was most likely taught to suppress her natural emotional responses, probably to tame the tempers in the old Keir Egan way. So in a sense, she's been severed, not by the chip, but by conditioning. And Ben Stiller, in a Variety interview from the 21st of March, said, even if they're not technically severed, they're still cut off from a part of themselves due to their allegiance to Keir and the ideology of Lumen. With Dan Erickson echoing this sentiment in a Rolling Stone interview, also from the 21st of March, where he said, as we were writing the show, we were researching different companies and cults and organizations that really do manage to get away with horrific or unethical things that oftentimes are hidden in plain sight, or surrounded by an unofficial code of silence, or there's enough loyalty to the group that these things that you would think would be impossible not to come out instead wind up in insular space. It's severing without severance, you know? So that makes Cobel's obsession with Mark even more layered. She was watching him with the eyes of someone who's already lived through a kind of severance. And as she's studying him, she might be wondering whether love can transcend severance, if emotional truth can survive conditioning, if something real can remain, even after a lifetime of being told to suppress it. So this naturally becomes her passion project, monitoring Mark to see if this emotional connection bleed-through comes out on the other side, in his Outie's life, since his Innie is directly interacting with Miss Casey, Gemma, at work. And with that, we also need to consider, when exactly did Gemma become Miss Casey? Was she severed and thus Miss Casey already before Mark even joined Lumen? I think Miss Casey was created after Mark joined, presumably the product of one of the files he had previously completed. So Miss Casey says to Mark that her existence has only been 107 hours long, with most of them being the half-hour wellness sessions. So here's some quick rough math. 107 hours long, minus the 8 hours she spent in MDR, that's 99 hours of wellness sessions, and if they're each half an hour long, that's 198 wellness sessions, and if we're going to say she did maybe 2 sessions per week, then that would equal her working there for a year and 11 months. Or if we did it for 3 sessions per week, she would have worked there for a year and 3 months. Either way, it's definitely, I think, less than 2 years. So I think Miss Casey was definitely began working on the severed floor after Mark joined 2 years ago. And it was probably Cobel who presented the idea of having Miss Casey work on the severed floor. I imagine it went like this. Salutations, the board. We have a refiner with an emotional connection to a testing floor subject who can complete their files in record-breaking time. Let's make another Innie, but instead of it being in a room on the testing floor, let's have it be on the severed floor, so the entire severed floor acts just like a bigger room on the testing floor. And we can see if him being around her physically helps enforce this underlying emotional connection to help him complete the files more quickly. Also, I should live next to him to keep an eye on him since he's a priority employee now. But Cobel's personal motives were, if he's completing these files so quickly because of an emotional undercurrent connection, I want to dig deeper into this, see how deep this connection can go because of my own unresolved trauma. I'm going to put them physically next to each other and see what emotional bleed-through happens, specifically for Mark, both in Innie and Outie form. I also have to live next to him and do all of my little tests like with the candle, evoking senses to encourage these emotional feelings to arise, and insert myself into his life to examine my findings and see if my hypothesis is correct, whether love can transcend severance. And we see how disappointed she is when Miss Casey and Innie Mark are talking in their final wellness session, and instead of it being about him having these love-type emotional feelings for her, it's instead him saying how they're still people who deserve to live a life, and that's why he's concerned about her being fired. And Cobel is visibly disappointed at hearing Mark say this, since it's not what she was expecting. And that's when Milchick says, "You know it's good, right, that they don't remember each other. it means the chips are working. Which definitely annoys Cobel, as that is not what she wanted. She wanted to see if there was an emotional bleed through. So then Cobel's left with her answer, that love does not transcend severance. Or so she thought, because season 2 actually shows us otherwise. Even if Innie Mark didn't feel love for Ms. Casey, others do. In fact, season 2 was full of characters whose emotional instincts seem to cut through the severance barrier. We see Innie, Dylan and Gretchen, Irving and Bert, bonded as Innies who also had a connection in Outie form. Mark and Helly, we see them bonded as Innies and still have a connection in Outie form. Like when we see Helena stalking Outie Mark when she just so happens to be at the same restaurant he is, they initially do have these flirtatious connection vibes. And we also see Gemma's Innie version 25 in Cold Harbour, where she follows Mark despite him being covered in blood. It's like on some deep level, she knows she can trust him and follow him. Which leads me to think that love did make it through the severance barrier, at least for this version of Gemma. So then we're back to asking, what makes Innie Mark different from all those other examples? Why did he choose Helly? And I suppose my answer is, it's not that Innie Mark's love for Helly is the kind that transcends severance in the usual way. It's that this love that they have, it's a brand new love, and it's powerful enough to overpower the kind of love that can bleed through instead, like Outie Mark's connection to Gemma. Not because it survived the split, but because it was born from it. A love not rooted in memory, but in becoming. And that brings us to another deeper lens through which we can understand all of this, where Innie Mark is like Dante, and Helly is his Beatrice. Now, if you've seen any of my previous videos, you'll already be familiar with all the parallel symbolic connections between Severance and Dante's Inferno. But today we're going to take it one step further. So, in the Divine Comedy, Dante begins his journey lost in a dark forest, spiritually broken, disconnected from himself. He travels through hell, Inferno, purgatory, and finally, heaven, paradise, searching for truth and salvation, exploring the journey from the suffering of hell to the joy of paradise. But here's the crazy part. Dante's real-life wife was named Gemma, and she's never mentioned in the poem, not once. Instead, he's guided through paradise by Beatrice, a woman he barely knew in real life. Beatrice was a real person, someone Dante loved from afar, and sadly she died young. But in his writings, she became more than a memory. She becomes a symbol of divine love, of clarity, of transcendence. So Gemma, his actual wife, is completely absent, forgotten in favour of a love that changed him, even if it wasn't traditionally romantic. Because it's Beatrice who leads Dante to the divine, not out of shared history, but out of deep, pure recognition of the soul. And now let's look at Severance. Because Mark's real wife is also named Gemma. And just like in Dante's work, she's not really present in the emotional life of Innie Mark. She technically exists, but only to a version of Dante who exists in the real world, in his outie life, in Mark's outie life, if you will. And Gemma's not the one who wakes him up to truth. That's Beatrice. It's Helly. And she doesn't remind him of who he used to be. She's leading him to who he is becoming. She is rebellion, emotion, awakening. Helly is transformation. So when Mark turns away from Gemma in the finale, it's because he never knew her. And the person who he himself actually is learning to love for the first time. And this Dante-Beatrice connection between Innie Mark and Helly could also help explain why his feelings for her seem to overpower his Outie's connection to Gemma. Outie Mark has spent 2 years grieving Gemma's death. His emotional connection to her is real, but it's buried under loss. Meanwhile, Innie Mark is starting with a blank emotional slate, and Helly becomes this central, emotionally charged presence in his world. Their relationship isn't just romantic, It's redemptive. Like Dante being guided through paradise by Beatrice, Helly represents the path towards awakening, and that connection is powerful enough to eclipse the grief Outie Mark has been carrying. And if we look at how this might parallel in Season 3, there's this prediction I've seen shared online that James offers Helly the chance to fully replace Helena on the outside. And maybe he offers to let Mark come with her too to persuade her, or maybe Helly demands it by refusing to go without him. Either way, I can see both of them taking over their Outie lives. And Innie Mark might think he's ascending to paradise because he gets to live and be with Helly, and they won't be trapped on the severed floor anymore. But the reality will be that he's still trapped, just in a different way, in a gilded cage, still under the Egon's thumb, under Lumen's control. So maybe they don't end up in paradise. Maybe it's purgatory. Maybe they've only climbed out of one hell just to discover there's another waiting. But overall, I think, at least thematically and symbolically, Season 3 could represent Helly leading Innie Mark towards paradise, just like how Dante followed Beatrice. But now we have to go back to the other central question of this video. Does love transcend severance? After everything we've explored, I think the answer is yes. Love does transcend severance. But not always, and not in the ways we expect. We've seen multiple examples that prove love, or at least some sort of emotional connection, can bleed through the severance barrier. It can survive memory loss and live in the subconscious. So maybe love does transcend severance, but it depends on what parts of you survive or are born from the split. Sometimes it might look like remembering someone you lost. Maybe it's learning how to feel again, or trusting a stranger, or letting go of a love that belonged to a version of you that no longer exists. But if some sort of reintegration is coming in Season 3, and it seems likely, then Mark won't be choosing between which love is more real. Instead, it'll be whether he, as one person, can live with the feelings and memories of both. And that's why the future of this story will be so complex too. It's not just about love, grief, memory, and identity. It's about a soul that's been split, and the ancient aching to become whole again. And this reminds me of how in Plato's Symposium, Aristophanes tells a myth explaining human love. Humans were originally whole, with 2 faces, 4 arms, and 4 legs. Fearing their power, Zeus split them in 2. Since then, we long for our other half, not out of desire, but out of a deep ache for wholeness. So love, in this myth, is the soul remembering what it lost. And that sounds like every severed person, being split in 2, longing for wholeness. And for Mark, reintegration could force this wholeness, but I think it will make him a fusion of opposites, almost like a Janus figure. Janus is the Roman god of beginnings, endings, transitions, and thresholds. He's depicted with 2 faces, one looking back, one looking forward. He symbolizes duality, time, and change, a guardian of passageways who exist between states, never fully in one or in the other. And in that sense, he embodies contradiction, memory and possibility in one form. So I think, applying that to Mark, he'll have one face turned towards the past and his grief, to Gemma, and the other towards freedom and awakening, to Helly. He'll have a double memory, a split soul now stitched together, and he won't be choosing between them. He'll be living with both. And that line of Janus, he's a guardian of passageways who exists between states, never fully in one or the other. I'm now thinking this is the reality of how reintegration will look. I think it might be a consistent battle between Innie Mark and Outie Mark, switching and taking it in turns to be the owner of the physical body they both share. And it's not just going to be one complete merged soul. It's going to be 2 separate people sharing one body. And if I had to predict how this will all unfold for Mark in the storyline of the show, specifically in regards to what will happen if he does manage to reunite with Gemma in this new reintegrated form, I'm reminded of the Greek myth of Alcestis and Admetus. In Euripides' Alcestis, King Admetus is fated to die unless someone volunteers to take his place. His wife, Alcestis, offers herself instead and dies. Before she fully passes into the underworld, Heracles confronts death and brings her back. But when Alcestis returns, she is silent and veiled, emotionally distant, as if changed by her brush with death. It's a reunion, but not a restoration. The love is still there, but it now carries grief, distance, and sacrifice. So maybe Mark was the initial target for Lumen, and maybe Gemma sacrificed herself to save him, and now she's returned from the underworld, but maybe she's changed. Or maybe it'll be like Odysseus and Penelope, another Greek myth. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus is away for 20 years, 10 spent fighting in the Trojan War, and 10 more lost at sea, facing trials, monsters, and gods. And back home, Penelope waits. When Odysseus finally returns in disguise, he must prove his identity, and Penelope, cautious and emotionally guarded, tests him by asking about their bed, a secret only the real Odysseus would know. Their reunion is intimate, hard-won, and filled with recognition, but they are no longer the same people who parted decades earlier. It's not a return to what was. It's a reunion built on endurance, grief, and transformation. So I wonder if this will be what happens when Mark finally reunites with Gemma in the outside world. Maybe exactly like this, actually, about having to prove his identity, that he really is Outie Mark, with Gemma testing him with something only his Outie self would know. But then they'll have to ask each other, are you still the same person I was waiting for? And Dan Erickson shared this in the Variety interview from the 21st of March. Mark's choice to reintegrate represents a willingness to destroy himself. There's this question of, to what degree you will still be yourself by the time it's done. So I don't think reintegration will restore Mark to be a whole, complete version of himself. And it won't prove which love is more real to him. It'll instead create something new, a living contradiction. A man of two truths. A Janus figure, where he'll always be looking in two ways. One face towards Gemma, one face towards Helly. And maybe that's what it really means for love to transcend severance. Not that it survives intact, but instead that it can transform through the act of healing. So maybe that will be the myth of Mark. Not a man who rediscovers himself, but one who has to learn to live with both lives. Love that was lost, love that was found, two truths, two timelines, but one soul. He becomes whole, not by choosing one half, but by learning to live while looking both ways. But what do you think? Does love transcend severance? Or is it something we have to choose, again and again, no matter who we are or who we become? Or maybe, love isn't what survives the split. Maybe it's what we build from the fragments left behind. And maybe, just maybe, that's what it means to be whole again. And before I end this video, I just wanted to mention something else that Dan Erickson also said in the Washington Post interview from the 21st of March, where he was asked, what are the questions you hope the audience is asking, and the questions that interest you as a storyteller moving forward? And he said, at the centre of it all are the emotional questions. What is the fallout of Innie Mark's choice? Will they continue to move towards Mark's reintegration? Do we want them to? What does that mean for the identity of each of them? Also, I think people hopefully are curious about what these tests were with Gemma, and what the greater ramifications of those are. What was Kyr's vision for the company? What is the company ultimately planning to do? These are the things that we're discussing, and I hope other people are discussing too. So, if anyone watching this knows Dan, please send him this video, because I think I've explored at least the emotional questions side of things that he mentioned he hoped people were discussing. And Dan, if you do ever end up watching this, I hope you've enjoyed my little analysis here and that it met your expectations. And yes, I would very much be interested in helping you write the rest of the show, if you feel so inclined to ask for my input. But with that, you have now reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Board has concluded the call. Yes, okay.